As you know, you came because Dan is the co-founder of Civil, the network that he'll explain. And Dan worked for 6 years at Google, a lot as helping to create the Google News Lab and working with news organizations and being one of their official spokesmen. And before that, he worked for many years in TV. So now I'll pass it on to Dan. Thank you.
Awesome. Patricia, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for coming tonight. So I will, I'll just introduce myself a little further so you kind of have some context as to how I landed at this crazy adventure called Civil. I did work at Google for several years and helped to create a couple of teams that fostered innovation and experimentation within storytelling, so the Google News Lab, and before that, a team called Google for Media. Prior to that, I did work in broadcast. I worked at ABC, CBS, CNN, and then before that, I was a print reporter at a newspaper called the Vancouver Sun. Anybody have been to Vancouver? Or
I've been to Vancouver and started the Anchorage Daily News.
All right. Well, so I'm going to consider you an honorary West Coaster then. And even before that, I worked in local news as a reporter and a photographer, and went to graduate school for journalism at the University of British Columbia. So anyway, just to kind of give you a sense that I was a science technology reporter. So my whole career has been about some combination of journalism and technology. And almost exactly a year ago, I was sitting at my desk at Google here in New York, and I came across a Neiman Lab article that was the headline was something like, "Civil is going to try to figure out blockchain and journalism." Okay. So I had worked as a journalist covering technology for the better part of 15 years. I worked at Google for 6 years, and I knew nothing about what blockchain was about, what cryptoeconomics involved, what this all meant. And as a lifelong learner, I had to find out more. So I contacted the folks who were behind the Civil website at the time, and Matthew Isles is the CEO, and this is really born out of his vision for what this could be. At the time, as you would imagine, this was a very nascent kernel of an idea. It was he and a couple of other people, but I was just captivated by what it could be. So this is almost a year ago, and I'm going to get into kind of where we're at now and where we're going in the very near future. So the tagline that we have here, if you will, is that we're building a decentralized marketplace for sustainable journalism on blockchain technology. Now, there's a lot to unpack with all of that, and I'm going to run through some slides might take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that, just to kind of set the table a bit. I have a few websites to show you to help, I hope, illustrate what I'm talking about. And when I'm finished, I would love to answer questions, and I'll do my best to answer whatever you want to ask, okay? So I really want to keep this as much of a conversation as possible. So I'm going to kind of go through the initial slides pretty quickly, because I get the feeling if you're here, you have a sense of why the journalism industry is in such a crisis. And as somebody who's seen it from a number of different perspectives, as a reporter, a local reporter who was laid off because our sales targets weren't being met, and this is 25 years ago, to today, of course, when we hear about all sorts of threats to journalism, and I think we can probably in our heads imagine lots of what those are, from bad actors to trolls to billionaire owners to broken business models to fake news, right? The list goes on and on. So if you were to just take for a second all of those things that we know are threatening journalism, the reason that we feel like it's in jeopardy, and I often, when I think about where the industry is headed, it feels like a race to the bottom sometimes for folks who care about this and really want to figure out ways to turn that around. So if you can imagine taking all that stuff that we all don't like and just put it in a box for a second and just slide it over there. It's a hard mental leap, but just imagine putting it away for a second. And then imagine building a platform in service of journalism, period. This is what we are trying to do, okay? And if you think of a platform like Airbnb, Etsy, Uber, Facebook, right? These are all platforms. And they all have different reasons to exist and different reasons why consumers might want to use them or participate in them. The difference between what those are about, a significant difference between what those are about and what we're doing, is those are centralized entities, right? So as we, I think, are all very familiar now, the data goes through centralized servers, centralized hubs. What we're talking about through blockchain is a decentralized platform. So in this way, and I can kind of get into how this is going to work, you can think of this as a cooperatively owned platform. So who owns this platform and who governs this platform and where does it go and what is it in service of? That is up to the citizens who will have the opportunity to participate in this platform or not. And I can get into kind of how that works. So just to kind of frame what I'm going to get into here for a second. And this is where we also see that cryptoeconomics, and I can kind of get into a bit more of how this all works, can help to incentivize people to participate in ways that maybe they wouldn't otherwise, which we can all perhaps debate the sort of the rationale behind why somebody feels like they want to participate in their civic duty, or why they want to vote, what pushes people to want to participate. And we know that not everybody's going to want to participate in running the platform, but there's going to be a small subset of people, and those are going to be the civil token holders, okay? And I can get into kind of what that means and how you might acquire a civil token and what does it give you and all that kind of stuff. But you can sort of think of it a bit like Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia, I would love for somebody to explain to me exactly how Wikipedia works kind of at the very end. How is it that Wikipedia is able to vet an obit 10 seconds after the person dies? What is the process that's going on? Who's verifying this? Who are these people, right? There's not a lot of transparency. You can get more involved if you want to. And this is the reality of how Wikipedia continues to exist, is that a small percentage of people really care about it and they get involved. And the rest of us have started to adopt signals of trust that we can see, well, this information is probably true, or they call out it's under review or whatever it is. It's up to us to decide, right? So in this way, that's how you can kind of think of the platform being governed. I'm going to get into this in a lot more detail, but I just kind of want to plant some seeds here, okay? I think this is basically what I'm saying. So the other thing to think about is that in the way to think of us as a platform, what we also are is a protocol. So we're not trying to fold the entire internet into a website or force every publisher to use our CMS or anything like that. In fact, and I can kind of also get into what the newsrooms that we're working with have today, and it's a WordPress experience and they have monetization tools. We're not trying to build the next great CMS, okay, to publish content on our platform. Someday, somebody's going to come along with something better. We're a very open source company, and that might replace it someday. The way to think of what these newsrooms are building on, and we have things I can talk about sort of how we're thinking about working with legacy publishers too, is it's a protocol. So HTTPS is a protocol. SMTP is a protocol. It's just a way that computers and networks can speak the same language and communicate with each other, okay? And for newsrooms to build on that protocol, and I can't maybe show you right now, maybe I'll show you in a second, but if everybody can imagine that green lock that you see in your browser bar when you go to put in your credit card information. And over time, I guess, many of us have become accustomed to seeing that, and it makes us feel like we can trust this site and we'll put in our credit card. It's almost second nature now. I don't think many people even notice it. You might notice when it's not there, but you kind of just expect that it's there. What if that green lock was a C, a letter C? And what that meant to you was that the content that you saw on that site was running on the civil protocol, okay? And all that means is it's exposed to the community of civil token holders. Meaning that the community of civil token holders are the ones holding that content accountable, okay? I can kind of get into how this process works, but over time, what we hope is that people would see some sort of an indicator to tell the audience, this content you're looking at on this website is being held accountable by the civil token holder community, okay? We can get into all of this stuff. I'm sort of just working my way into some of the more sort of technical aspects of what we're up to. just as sort of a, a side-by-side comparison of the reasons and the opportunities that we see within blockchain. And I would call out two of them. One is around governance, which I can get into more, and that's the idea of voting and civil token holders. And we have other utility aspects to our token that I can get into as well. But there's the idea of permanence. And because the content is distributed across so many different computers, it's really all blockchains are, right? Just thousands of computers that are all sharing computing power and storage and all of this. So trying to delete content off every single computer, imagine trying to remove the newspaper from every place that it's been delivered to, right? So in this way, it creates a permanent archive. Now there are challenges within all of this, by the way, that we are working through, and other people within the broader blockchain world are also working through. There's some limitations, some things that we can't quite do yet. But those are the two big areas that we see opportunity. I mean, think back to when DNA Info was shut down, for folks who know that it's a local site. And those journalists were very concerned about the archive when Joe Ricks shut down DNA Info. And for a time, that archive was gone. And it only came back really because there was a lot of public pressure and people were concerned about this. And even still, I think it's in some sort of state of flux. So I think in terms of just people's concern and alarm around the permanence of content and being the sort of first record of history, where does this live and what if it isn't available anymore? So here's kind of what I'm getting at, just to kind of reinforce the message here. And again, I'm going to show you all of this in a little bit more sort of detail and visually in just a second. And the civil token, by the way, so this is, owning cryptocurrency, okay? So does anybody here own cryptocurrency of any kind, just through Coinbase or something? Okay. So in this way, it is a token, but we are encouraging people to think of it as a utility, because for the value of the civil token to ever go up, the platform must be in service of journalism. It must attract more newsrooms to set up shop on our platform. Because what a new newsroom has to do, so if you think of eBay, I'm going to use eBay as an example for a second, or Medium, I use Medium. So if you want to be a blogger on Medium, right, there's not a whole lot that you have to do really. You just provide your name and password, create an account, maybe you try to monetize content, but you're just whoever you are. I read some amazing content on Medium, but I don't really know who these people are. So sometimes I read it with a pretty high degree of skepticism. But there's really nobody who's holding that community accountable other than maybe comments or somebody complains about something. If you were to come to civil in the future, once the token has been distributed and the platform is live, and you wanted to join our platform and start publishing, use our CMS, start making money, cash, not fiat, not cryptocurrency. The newsrooms that are publishing in our platform are just e-commerce, okay? So if you want to come to our platform in the future, you have to do 4 things. You have to tell the community, what is your mission? What is your charter? What are you about? There's no right or wrong, but just tell everybody why you exist. Who are the journalists that you're going to be working with? Who is part of your newsroom? Again, this is all shared with the community. This isn't to us, it's to everybody who's going to hold these newsrooms accountable. You have to agree to adhere to our civil constitution. I can kind of get into that. I'll show you the Constitution. It's currently up for public comment. And the Constitution you can kind of think of as like a terms of service. So if you're going to publish on Medium or any other platform, you probably don't even know you've just gone like yes to terms of service. And this is where everybody gets into some of the legal weeds with privacy and everything else. In our case, it's in service of journalism. The 4th thing you have to do is acquire about $1,000 worth of civil tokens. Now that doesn't go to us. What that goes to is it goes at risk. So you're saying, I'm going to uphold the civil constitution, I'm going to publish my content through your platform, I'm going to start making money from the community and people who think that I'm doing great journalism. All I have to do is uphold the civil constitution. Here's my $1,000 worth to say I'm going to commit to that. And if I don't, I can be challenged by any civil token holder in the community who feels like I violated the civil constitution. I can get into, this sets up a challenge. This is where the community participates and votes in this process. They have to, by the way, the challenger has to very specifically cite how they violated the civil constitution. If you want to be frivolous about it and start challenging newsrooms, it's going to get expensive to be an asshole, okay? There are other parameters that will limit those kinds of challenges. But let's just say somebody challenges a newsroom over some content that they've read. And that triggers a vote to every civil token holder in the community. And they have an opportunity to vote with whoever they feel is right. And whoever loses the challenge loses their tokens, because the challenger has to also stake tokens. So they lose their tokens. 50% of them go to the winner. The other 50% get distributed to everybody who participated in the vote. So this is where cryptoeconomics starts to incentivize people to participate. And again, the only way that the value of the token goes up is if this all starts to feel good, because if more newsrooms want to join our platform, they have to acquire those civil tokens. That puts a demand on the civil token, because this isn't being mined. There are a finite number of civil tokens. So that increases the value and the demand on the token, because there are more newsrooms joining our platform, and they all have to acquire these tokens from somewhere, from an exchange or wherever, in order to get into our platform. So we want it to be amazing, because we want journalists to feel like we have to go publish on civil. Great, yeah, we'll acquire civil tokens and adhere to your constitution. We just want to get in there and start doing this. So I'm going to keep moving here, because I don't want to get too into the weeds before we have time for questions. There are other aspects to sustainability that we can get into. The one thing to think about is that this is an ad-free platform. So this isn't about figuring out clicks for cash or whatever it is. There are no ads. This is a very direct newsroom to audience opportunity. We do not take a percentage of those transactions. I can get into kind of our business model, and it involves developers, and a bit like the Apple App Store, and we want to bring developers into this ecosystem. But as far as how these newsrooms on our platform achieve sustainability, that's up to them. We want to think of the right ways to support them, but we can't pick favorites in this decentralized world either. So there are a lot of things we need to figure out. Credibility indicators is something I'll show you sort of an example of that. If people are familiar with the Trust Project or the Credibility Coalition, these are first draft. These are different efforts to try to install signals of trust to help people understand, was the reporter on the ground, where did they get their data from, who are they, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think we can all argue that there are certain people who will never care about credibility indicators. But let's not worry about them for right now. And this is to help illustrate the Wikipedia idea. So if you think about most people who are going to come to a civil newsroom, and I'll show you the ones that are out there publishing now, are not necessarily going to know that it has anything to do with civil, certainly that has anything to do with blockchain or cryptocurrency or anything else, and they don't need to. They shouldn't have to. If they want to know more about it, they can. So in the Wikipedia idea, if they start poking around, they're like, oh, I see, this newsroom runs on civil. Maybe I want to acquire a civil token, right? But that's where most of the people above the waterline are not going to get so wrapped up in the cryptoeconomic part, and they don't need to. But then as you sort of go further down into the water, if you will, there are sort of more reasons to want to understand how this all works, whether you hold a token, you're a developer, you're a newsroom, a journalist, whatever it is. So this is just to sort of recap what I was talking about. I think these bullet points are really what I was saying in terms of how to think about where a citizen fits into this, and the opportunity for newsrooms to publish on the platform, and the tokens that they need to acquire in order to have access to all of this. Sorry, no, you're taking. I can always share the presentation with everybody too. So, and once a newsroom applies to join civil, and let's just say the community has no issue with them when they apply, nobody takes any action when they apply, nobody challenges them. Great. They become part of what's called a token curated registry, or a TCR. And that's, you can kind of think of that as a whitelist of publishers that are okay to be on our platform. And if they violate the Constitution, if they're challenged, if there's something that is just egregious enough that they should no longer be on the platform, then they can be deplatformed. So this is the sort of seriousness that we want to instill in the journalists that are participating in this. Now, if this all starts to go in, let's call it a Brexit direction with the voting, or people feel like it's a bit off, you can appeal the decision. And then if that still feels like it's off, or even if there's a reason for someone to step in because the community just maybe didn't get it right, this is where we have our Civil Journalism Council, the Civil Council, which is part of our nonprofit called the Civil Foundation. And a few weeks ago, about a month ago, we announced that Vivian Schiller is the CEO of that foundation. So she's the former CEO of NPR, spent a long time at the New York Times, at CNN, and she's already seating her counsel who will help to adjudicate these disputes and challenges. And they will have to publish their findings in a very transparent way, and maybe even start to set precedent over time to try to establish the behavior on the platform. I can kind of get into more of how all that works. But that's the idea of the civil registry. Now, this is a part of the blockchain cryptoeconomic world. It's a, I wouldn't say it's a growing part of sort of how this all works. The idea of, there are some efforts around advertisers in this way. So thinking about, could you have a white list of advertisers that are adhering to some set of standards or ethics? And that allows them to have access to consumers in ways that are acceptable. We can all debate whether that feels good or not, but that's one area that's being looked into. And the civil constitution, which I'll pull up in a bit and you can see what it looks like currently, is something that did start with us, but it's been reviewed by more than 50 journalists, academics, First Amendment lawyers. We have, this is where Vivian is helping to ratify this constitution. So over the roughly first year, 365 days after we launch, the council, along with the community, will have an opportunity to amend the Constitution, change it, whatever they feel like is missing. And in the future, they can also continue to do that. This isn't sort of set in stone, much like the Constitution that we know here. Very similar sort of a model. And I think that, as we also know, the Constitution doesn't solve everything, right? And I think that the thing to remember is that we're not trying to solve journalism. I would argue that journalism is not ever going to be solved, much like democracy will never be solved. It could be better, it could be sustainable. It's a business, right? So what are the ways in which that we as a community can help to make that possible? And that's where we see civil fitting in. So I mentioned the Civil Council, and that they have this opportunity to weigh in as, let's call it the voices of authority, or the experts, right? And I know some of the folks that Vivian is seating in the council, and she has autonomy over all of those people. We're not telling her who to seat, but they're really, I think they're really great folks, and I'm excited about their participation in this. They will also not be doing this for the rest of their life. These are term positions. They'll be cycled through. We're trying to be global. It's a global platform. So thinking about ways that we can make this feel international, participation from people in other countries. And then you see at the bottom that the council can also be overturned by the community in a supermajority vote. So they can be held accountable in these checks and balances as well. So I'll kind of just skip through some of this, and then I want to show you some real world examples. For the people who are a little bit more into crypto and blockchain, we're using an ERC20 token. So this is built on Ethereum, which is the second largest blockchain, I think, next to Bitcoin, right? So Ethereum, and the advantage with Ethereum is that unlike Bitcoin, and if people want to talk about the differences between Bitcoin and Ethereum and others, I'm happy to get into it. But the sort of primary way to think about why it's different is that Bitcoin is very specifically about one thing. It's about a store of value, a trustless system that allows an exchange of transactions and a store of value. That's basically it. People have realized its limitations for paying for things, the time it takes, all of this stuff, right? Ethereum is much more about building on top of that. So what are the ways in which you can tap into that trustless system, or the proof of stake, or proof of existence, or proof of work? These are the kinds of terms that happen in a decentralized system, where there are people participating in sort of the veracity of things that are going through these networks. Just a reminder though, garbage in, garbage out, right? The blockchain is not a magic basket of perfect and true information. So that's the journalists and the newsrooms that are publishing on our platform. Yes, they're pushing their content. They will have the option to push the content to the blockchain, but they're also pushing it to the web. And they will have to think about, where does each one live? This is really up to them. Do they want to push everything to blockchain? That creates a permanent log that people can go and see. Okay, well, I guess that's up to you, really. I mean, I know there are some journalists who get nervous about this sort of thing, because what if something is wrong? What if they have to change something? I'm going to say, as somebody who worked on the digital side of newsrooms for many years, there are corrections that sometimes get made and maybe aren't called out in as public a way as we all might like, right? And that's a reality that I think we all probably know, and how that gets told to the audience, we changed this thing, or this was corrected, or how you know that anything changed, right? But through blockchain, you can timestamp the content. There's no way of trying to fake when it was updated. So if you really want to know and go back and see that kind of, the sort of breadcrumb trail, you can do that. I won't get so much into this because these are other use cases of our token and cryptoeconomics, but there are ways that blockchain helps around licensing and syndication. So you can kind of think of like a fingerprint being attached to a digital asset, and then you wrap that in what's called a smart contract, and that basically sets terms. If this photo is used in this story for a week, the cost is X, and it gets distributed to this person and to this person. If this photo goes somewhere else, then the compensation goes back to this person and this person and this person and this percentage and this percentage and this percentage. And that's where this cascading compensation starts to come in. And I think we can think of a lot of ways where this can help with content creators. And so here, if you think about citizens who are very early into where we are, the value to them is here, and as time goes on, the value to them is going to go up as we start to pull more types of contributors, more audiences into this. So there's a network effect that's starting to happen with all of this. And I mentioned some of the rewards. So there are ways that newsrooms can think about incentivizing people to become a member or to join their newsroom. This is all audience engagement. And by the way, to be clear, and I should have said this from the beginning, we are not trying to do all this ourselves. We are a 25-person company, but we can only do so much. And this is where we're trying to work with the entire ecosystem. We're not trying to put anybody out of business. Quite the opposite, actually. So we're trying to work with developers or newsrooms, associations, lots of ways to think about how to do this. So we're talking to folks like the Coral Project, the News Revenue Hub, to journalism schools, right? There's all of this knowledge that we're trying to help unlock and share it with the people who are going to need it in order to achieve sustainability. This is a diagram that I'm just going to move on from because I want to get to some of the stuff that is happening now. So last year, we received $5 million in funding from Consensus, which is the venture studio attached to Ethereum. And we carved out some of that money to grant to applicants to become part of our first fleet of newsrooms. So this was a big leap of faith for journalists who, this is back, right around the time that I was starting, and it was very early days, but some journalists came to us and said, all right, we'll start a newsroom with you and we'll kind of figure this out together. And we gave them some grant money, cash, to pay their journalists, and then we allocated them some civil tokens. And that helped to set the value of the civil token because it's sort of the risk tolerance that each of the journalists had in accepting a difference between cash and tokens helped us understand what is the value of the civil token, because back then it had zero value. So we started to work with journalists as they were coming to our platform and committing to us and starting to understand just people's risk tolerance. They'll this is like in their head, they're like, okay, I'll accept X amount to pay my salary for a few months or some number of months. What am I comfortable with to make up the difference with civil tokens? And everybody's different, right? So we just started to understand people's comfort level with this. So anyway, we ended up with 13 First Fleet newsrooms, okay? And we asked that they cover local, policy, investigative, and international reporting because we felt like those were the most threatened areas of journalism based on the current business models. That was really the only criteria. Now, this is the one and only time that we are setting ourselves up as a centralized entity because somebody had to decide, are these journalists legit and are they even capable of getting a business up and running? So that's where we worked with our partners at Old Town Media, led by Tom McGovern, who founded Capital New York and a long time at Politico, and his team helped us to vet these newsrooms. Now that in the future is what the community will do, to be clear. But for now, somebody had to supply and demand as a platform, we're trying to create the supply, right? So I'll show you some of these examples. The one that people may have heard of more recently is the Colorado Sun. So a group of about a dozen or so Denver Post journalists who were either laid off or left their job got together and decided to open a newsroom on Civil called the Colorado Sun. We were really excited, of course, about this. There was a story in the New York Times about it, and we've had a wonderful amount of interest just because of that group of journalists, which of course I think we all know who follow the space that the Denver Post is in some pretty dire straits. So to hear that they reassembled in this way, I think is heartening, because the opposite is terrifying. So these are some of the journalists who have taken this leap with us thus far. And maybe some of these names are familiar, maybe not. Aja Delario used to write for Gawker. Manoush Zomorodi had Note to Self, WNYC podcast. Mazen used to contribute to, I want to say, the New York Times or the Guardian. Josefa, Sludge, longtime investigative journalist. Jen at Block Club Chicago, which I'll get into. And Jai Jing, I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name. Daily is put together by Tom Skoka, also formerly of Gawker, and I think it's going to be a really interesting publication. Manoush, by the way, her partner, Jennifer, they host a podcast called Zigzag, and that's basically the newsroom that they've created, and it's also about us. So it's a bit meta. She talks about her journey as a journalist, leaving WNYC, and what this is all about. And so if you listen to her podcast, which is doing pretty well on iTunes, you actually hear about what we're up to at Civil, and she tells it from her point of view, which we don't have anything to do with. So sometimes I listen to her podcast and just see it from a totally different perspective, right? She's like, we're going on this crazy crypto journey. What's this all about? So I already mentioned consensus in terms of our funding. And we also like to point out that we are a journalism company that thinks blockchain can help. We're not a blockchain company in search of some problem in the world, right? I think that we, as a company, as somebody who's been in the space of journalism and technology for 25 years, every day I'm heartened by people's commitment to this, and even the people on the team who are, relatively, the journalism isn't maybe sort of their first job that they maybe, but a lot of them have worked in engineering at media companies. They have a passion for this. They could have gone to work for a lot of different blockchain or crypto companies. These are talented people, but they said we need to help figure out what journalism, where journalism goes. There are a few people just to call out. Christine worked at the New York Times and at the Wall Street Journal. I actually just saw her earlier for coffee. We were talking with Alan Miller, who leads the News Literacy Project, and Christine is good friends with folks like Walt Mossberg and Kara Swisher. Nicole was a managing editor at DNA Info here in New York before it was shut down, and she's really been working very closely with our newsrooms, our first lead newsrooms, to help understand what they need. And you imagine they're all coming to this brand new too, and they're also trying to think, how do we start to generate some revenue here? And of course I mentioned Vivian as well. And then we have a number of different partners, advisors who we're working with. We've really started to sort of expand the ecosystem and try to pull in as many folks as we can, because again, we're not going to do this alone. If this is a moonshot, normally when you try to send a rocket somewhere, you want to shed weight from the rocket. This is sort of the laws of physics, right? Stages of the rocket. But our rocket only gets to the moon if we try to get as many people on the rocket as possible, right? This isn't us just doing this. We need the journalism community to get on board. This is where we're trying to see opportunities for lots of different organizations to work with us. Okay, so I'm gonna hop out of this for a second, and I'm gonna just take you to some newsrooms. So, I mentioned Block Club Chicago. So, Block Club Chicago did not exist a few months ago. The genesis of it started to exist when they came to us, but this was not a publication that existed. These were the editors from DNA Info in Chicago that was also shut down. So they said, all right, we're gonna regroup here, and we're gonna come up with our own publication that focuses on the neighborhoods in Chicago. Now, they are publishing through a WordPress CMS, so we've been working with WordPress to figure out what newsrooms need. And you can see here up in the corner it says this newsroom runs on Civil. It's really the only indication as you scroll down that it has anything to do with Civil, and this is unless you get to the bottom here, okay? Now, each of these newsrooms has their own, they have autonomy over how they want to monetize their content. We're not setting that, and we're working with different companies to help to set that up. But in this case, they've created a subscription, okay? You can do monthly, you can do annually, okay? They chose to set this up, they set the price, they get all the money. This isn't how we make money as a company, okay? There are tiny transaction fees, but those go to Pico, which is the company we're working with, and we're even trying to get rid of those. The point is there's not meant to be anything between the newsrooms and the journalists, or the audience, okay? Cannabis Wire, this is another one. Yushin and Allison, who founded this newsroom, have been thinking about this for a long time, and they're covering the multi-billion-dollar industry, right? And they have a lot of different ways that they're thinking about. They have a lot of different ways thinking about even doing deeper white papers that they could potentially sell to clients. So they're trying to think creatively about ways to achieve sustainability. For the international audience, we do have one international newsroom thus far. We've had interest from others in some fascinating parts of the world, in Eastern Europe and Brazil. And the one that we are very close to announcing being live is Global Ground, based in Myanmar, run by a woman, Enrique Visser, who's based between like Berlin, Bangkok. She's an investigative journalist. She's super talented. She came from like financial crimes reporting, and she's got this whole network in Southeast Asia. So she's going to start publishing on Global Ground, I would say sometime in the next week or two, maybe 2 weeks. And she's really thinking about telling those stories from the region, but doing it in a very human-centric way, so they start to resonate with more people outside of Southeast Asia. And this is where, as a platform, I think it really starts to get interesting. Because if you think about eBay as a platform, how many sellers sell shoes on eBay? I don't know. A lot, right? And yet they all continue to exist somehow, and they have audiences in different parts of the world maybe, or they have a different storefront, or whatever distinguishes them. And in this way, if Global Ground is telling stories that matter to people in the region, great, but now they can start to find audiences elsewhere in maybe different ways than in the past. And the last one I'll show you is Sludge. So they're also an investigative newsroom. In this case, they're about dark money and politics. And they have different ways that you can get involved with them. All of them are, of course, thinking about things like newsletters and all the audience engagement stuff that any news organization would have to figure out. And you can see that it's a slightly different skinning, right? They're not all exactly the same, but again, you're not really going to know that you have anything to do with Civil unless you scroll all the way to the bottom. So I'm going to finish by just talking about the Constitution and encourage you to read it if you're interested. It does contain, as I say, it gets into. It's not about reinventing the wheel. The standards of journalism ethics are pretty well established, we think. But how do we incorporate those into a community-based document that's giving people cues on how to govern the platform? What are the things that they should be looking for? Much like the Constitution doesn't say, if this happens, then go do this. It's more of a, if this happens, then here's how maybe you should figure this out. So this is how we have helped to define people's roles. What is the governance structure? How does the registry work? And then different ways to think about the application and challenge process. Remembering that, okay, all of this may not matter to people who are reading all of this, right? And it doesn't have to. So this is sort of the vision, if you will. I'm going to wrap up with just like a really maybe into the future idea. So if you think about what is going to make this work, how is this going to be successful? There's probably a critical mass that's necessary for this to really feel like it's humming along. Okay, so Are the early days going to possibly be a bit rocky? Is there going to be some amount of uncertainty? Are people going to be sort of mystified a bit in figuring this out? Probably. I mean, this is brand new to pretty much everybody. But I think if any of you have been paying attention, or not paying attention, sort of following the blockchain cryptocurrency world, it's evolved so much that in a year, or not quite a year ago, when I would go to talk to folks, I'd say, have you heard of blockchain, right? And they'd be like, no, what is, sorry, blockchain? And now I go in and I say, have you heard of blockchain? Oh, yeah. And when we go to talk to partners, so we're talking to legacy partners, could they experiment with the newsroom here? Could they find other reasons to be involved? Fact-checking, distribution, photos, licensing, all sorts of ways to think about maybe how they can get involved. This isn't going to happen overnight, right? This is a long-term, this is the long game for us. But if we can seek that critical mass, if we can seek out the right people who are engaged in this platform and helping it to grow, then maybe everybody wins. So I'll just stop there on a positive note, and I'd be happy to take questions.
We'll use our
Okay.
microphone. Al.
Sure.
We'll pass. Where's the other one?
And if you want to know more about us, I'll take you to that too.
For the video, it helps if everybody uses a microphone to ask their question.
Okay, Daniel, it sounds like a lovely idea, but I wonder how you prevent, just for instance, the surrogates, the Koch brothers and the Koch brothers, or Mr. Putin's representatives, or the Chinese, who I think now do at least half of the Bitcoin transactions in the world, or cryptocurrency transactions, from dominating your platform.
You're saying there are bad people out there. You're right.
Maybe more of them than there are of us.
Yeah, well, so this is the kind of
Bad people have been buying a shitload of civil tokens, is what he's saying.
Sure. So I want to get into yes. So yes, that is something that we've thought about a lot. And some days I really wish that we could open the doors of Civil and let you all see the intensity and the existential conversations that we have about this stuff. It's pretty hardcore, as somebody who's been in journalism for this long. So the answer is, when we sell our Civil token, and if you see here, our token launch is coming soon, okay? This is a public sale. We are looking for what we call strategic purchasers. Now, we get people asking us to buy our tokens all the time, and they're often, or they might be sort of, not all the time, but they're like VCs, right? They're people who see this as an investment opportunity. That's not who we want. So we're talking to news organizations to help them understand why would they want to own Civil tokens. Now, I'll get to your.
The Koch brothers wanted to buy the Tribune company.
Yep. So I'm actually gonna get to this. So we are only gonna have a finite number of Civil tokens, okay? So when we sell our Civil token, we'll sell, I think it's somewhere in the order of about 16 million, okay? And in order for anybody to acquire them, you will need to come to our site. You'll need to go through what's called a KYC process. This is called Know Your Customer. It's a quiz, sort of forces you to understand why on earth you're buying this token. It's a bit of a, why are you here, right? It's just helping people understand. Now, that is not going to prevent anybody, of course, from trying to game the system. But what we want to do, we've been trying desperately to do for the past several months, is to demonstrate to news organizations why they should hold significant numbers of Civil tokens to prevent the exact thing that you're talking about.
Okay, let me follow up 1A.
Yep.
Rupert Murdoch and Fox News decide this is a good platform. Let's take it over.
Yep. So I think, I want to understand your question. Taking it over, is that
They buy the majority of tokens.
Yep. So
They control the vote when it goes to the community.
Yep.
It's their community.
Yep. So
Welcome to Reddit.
Yep. So the first way to help to mitigate that is getting the Civil token into the hands of people who care about it. So this is where we're working with newsrooms. This is the message we want to send to consumers, right? We're a tiny company, but we're saying, please come and help us for partly this very reason, okay? But not entirely. Because if you try to acquire a significant number of Civil tokens, because of the transparency of blockchain and cryptocurrency, none of this is done in the dark, okay? So there are ways to see that these things are happening. And if once the civil token is out on exchanges, because there's not really a way to buy a significant number through our sale. We have very strict parameters on how many tokens you can buy, and we have ways of verifying at least the identity of who these people are, to a degree to which we're not worried about a majority of them being in the hands of any one person. But once they're out of our hands, okay, and these tokens are out in exchanges, if anybody wants to buy them, including Rupert Murdoch or whoever, they have to go through these exchanges. There's no other way to get them. And once they would start buying civil tokens at a rapid rate, because they don't get them all from one place, they have to buy them from all the people who currently own them, right? They're only a finite number and everybody's sitting on them. So if they start putting up a buy order for civil tokens, the price starts to go up, because this triggers interest from all the people.
But they don't care.
So the way that cryptoeconomics works is it starts to become exponentially, prohibitively expensive, to the point where we're talking about orders of billions of dollars, maybe more, okay, in order to get even a majority of the tokens. And if they can get close to that, if they're really going to throw billions of dollars into this, we can see this happening. And this is where the council and Vivian step in and start to think about whether to adjudicate this and what's going on, and maybe we pause the whole platform or whatever it is, or we fork the platform. That's another thing that happens in blockchain a lot. As people start to think about what they want to do and not the community that I'm not talking about us now, I'm talking about other decentralized entities, because they work with a majority of people who agree with it. But if enough people start to think, well, no, Bitcoin should now be doing this thing and the protocol should be doing this thing, and they can get enough people to try to change its behavior and change it, it creates these forks where people go off in a different direction and sort of regroup. And this has happened with Ethereum. There are historical cases where this has happened. So there are workarounds to what you're describing. That doesn't mean that we're not going to lose sleep over it. I mean, we extreme stress test the living whatever out of this. I mean, this is all we do. So, because none of this works for anybody if these types of things happen. So, I mean, I realize and I appreciate that a lot of this is very theoretical and that the proof is in the pudding, right? And there's going to be no way for us to assuage everybody's concerns maybe until it starts to actually happen. But we're hopeful. I'm not going to say that we're like kicking back and feeling too good about ourselves.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
So I think I understand some of what you described, but so I guess a few questions, and it's all sort of interrelated to one question.
Yeah.
So will putting aside the initial people that are on it now, will most of the news organizations, let's call it that for lack of a better term, that are on the civil platform, do you believe they'll be existing news organizations, or will they be new organizations that are created specifically for this? And then the second, maybe you should answer that first before I ask the sort of related question. Or I can keep
Go ahead,
that.
sure, yeah.
So I guess, is the idea, if you want to start what do you have, Block Club Chicago? Let's say you wanted to start a Block Club St. Louis, and you weren't part of this initial group that got some money.
Yep.
So I understand why they would want to be part of it, because they got some money. But if you're Block Club St. Louis,
Sure.
is the benefit of being on civil that it's just some PR, you can go to the civil main page and see the links? Is that essentially why they wouldn't just start their own website? Like, why do they need you, I guess?
For sure. So I think they are, of course, free to do that on their own, right? I mean, if people aren't seeing enough value from us, then I'm
What is the
yeah.
is the value that just on the main page there's a link to?
No,
What is
I wouldn't even think of us as a main page, right? So not like a Netflix for news. These newsrooms are all operating independent of each other and independent of us. They're building on our protocol, but we're not telling them what to write. We're not telling them how much money they're supposed to charge.
What
this
is
is all up to
building
them.
on your protocol?
So they're using our CMS, and when they push their content to the blockchain, that's basically like using our protocol. Okay. So then in this way, they have the opportunity to archive their content, to create that permanence, but those are not
That's
actually.
probably pretty cheap. Like, why?
Well, actually, it's kind of the other way around right now. But I'll answer your first question, or the second question. Why would they want to come to us?
Yeah, why not just have your own website? Why do they need you?
For
What's
sure.
the benefit of being?
So I think it's probably two big things. One is that, as I was describing earlier, that green lock symbol that you can see up there, we're trying to create a community of trust. So if you see that this is a civil newsroom, over time, I'm not saying day one, but over time, the idea is, and by the way, these newsrooms, the token's not even out there yet, right? So the governance part of this hasn't kicked in. But in the future, if you start to see that this is a civil newsroom, even if it's subtly part of the branding or wherever it is, does this, and I'm asking the question, does this start to give you a sense of trust in that Wikipedia idea? That you know that this content is being held accountable by the community. And if it's there, if they're publishing, if they're not under review, and every newsroom that gets challenged will be publicly available. So you can start to see why they may be challenged. And then
there's data that news organizations are failing because of this issue of trust. I mean, I didn't realize that that was that was sort of one of the challenges to sustainable news organizations.
Yeah. Well, the sustainable part I'll get to in a second. I think the first one is about just audience engagement, right? So why would anybody want to come and read your content? Like, what is the value to them? There's the journalism and there's whatever it's about, but by and large, people tend to go to sites they trust. And so how do we start to instill that in people in a way that makes sense? So that's kind of an audience engagement part. Great, so you pull people in, now what? So this is where we are trying to create as many different customizable business models for these newsrooms as they can possibly have, okay? So right now, as I say, we're working with this company called Pico, which makes all of these different business models possible. So they can do a subscription or a membership drive. We're working on micro-tipping. We want to think about, what about a Kickstarter campaign sort of thing that they could tie into it? What about, I don't know, like there are probably a lot of ways, and this is where we're talking to the whole industry, right? This isn't us trying to figure this out. We're trying to bring in all the experts to say, you know what, if you could make this kind of an a la carte or a menu of different ways to kind of engage with people, maybe if they become an early member and they recruit somebody, you give them a civil token to kind of incentivize them to go get some more. I mean, there's a lot of economics involved in this that's not, I'm not saying it's sort of these are proven economic models, but these are just opportunities for newsrooms to access these. So when you combine those two together and you have the opportunity to start to build trust and a varying menu of ways to think about sustainability and hopefully access to what you were talking about around marketing or branding, maybe there's a network effect that starts to take place. One of the things that we use Slack, and one of the things that I've noticed and we as a team have noticed, all of these newsrooms are in our Slack channels. And in the beginning, we sort of thought, oh, well, they're all just going to be a bit siloed and kind of off doing their thing. They've been sharing best practices. Hey, help me get this MailChimp newsletter thing. How do I convert my subscriber, right? That nobody's in this way competing with each other at the moment. You know, I mean, again, on something like eBay or Etsy, you know, if people go out of business, I don't know why the reasons that some people go out of business. Did they not figure it out? Were there too many competitors? Were they not good enough? Did they get bad reviews? I don't know. But that's what all of these newsrooms are going to have to start to figure out. And we want to work with them in this way. We're not just saying, go off and you're on your own now. But at the same time, we're not the arbiters of all this stuff. We're not running the algorithm, right? That's where we're decentralized. So if things don't feel good and there isn't enough for these journalists and the newsrooms are unhappy, this is the big play for us is also bringing in developers, right? So we want to open this up, open source, bring in developers. If there are monetization tools that are missing, create them, great, sell them to the newsrooms. This is commerce, right? I mean, these newsrooms have to survive. And so in that way, you can almost think of us as kind of like an app store, Apple App Store, right? Apple courts these developers. Apple puts out a weather app. It's like, okay, right? And then developers come in and make 30 different weather apps, and Apple takes a piece of those transactions. That's part of our business model. So we want to bring in developers to do all of the stuff that newsrooms need, period. Yeah.
What about the first question, about whether you assumed that the most of the news organizations that are
Yeah. So I would say that so we had 550 plus applications for our first fleet newsrooms, and they continued to come in, actually.
But there you were giving them money, right?
That's correct.
That's a pretty massive distinction.
Yep, that's a big, oh, thank you. You're right, that's certainly an incentive that may have tipped more people. And this is where we have to prove why it's worth being here, right? And hopefully, as these newsrooms start to go out in the world and this network effect starts to kick in, you know, more people hear about them, word starts to spread, more people see a reason to participate. It starts to grow at a faster rate. That's our hope, that's our plan, that's our thinking, our hypothesis, okay? Will they be established journalists or will they be citizens, right? We're not forcing people to be a journalist. How do people identify as a journalist? I was a practicing journalist for 20 years. If somebody asks me if I'm a journalist, if you're a doctor, you're sort of a doctor for life, I guess. Like if you stop, you're still a doctor. But if you're not practicing journalism, are you still a journalist? I don't know. If you've got amazing video of a protest that's taking place in DC and you upload it to YouTube, are you a journalist? I don't know, right? So in this way, as long as people are adhering to the Constitution, then I don't know, this is where it's up to the community, right? There are aspects of blockchain that are around identity, around like a self-sovereign identity, where you would identify somebody and your name is not attached to it. It's called a hash, right? So it's just a series of letters and numbers, but that can be a permanent ID that you take with you to different places. I'm not saying that this is something we're going to do right away or whatever, but it's an option, especially for international journalists to think about if they're in places where they're under fear of censorship or threat. Can that help them publish in a way that they can feel safer and not shut down? I don't know. I'm getting into the weeds a little bit, but could be a bit of both.
I have a question. Could you talk about how legacy journalist organizations would fit into this and whether you think they'd be a part of it?
Yeah, I can. I mean, there are a couple of partnerships that we just can't announce yet. I'll give you the example without naming names. One is a newsroom focused on the fentanyl opioid crisis, and a particular newsroom wants to do an ongoing investigation into this, maybe a temporal investigation, so not something that's sort of just forever, but they want to figure out, can they help to fund that reporting through a civil newsroom by asking people to contribute, again, fiat, this has nothing to do with cryptocurrency now, but and I wish I could tell you the name of the newsroom, but for this particular newsroom, they rely heavily on advertisers. And the content that they're talking about doesn't always get the sort of traffic that maybe they would need, and so it tends to sort of fall by the wayside, or it just doesn't get the attention that they want. So in this way, they're sort of thinking, all right, let's just experiment. Let's just see what this is about. And that's really all that we're asking of a lot of newsrooms. We're not asking for money. We don't want any of that stuff. We're actually giving tokens to them. This is not our business model, is to bring the journalism industry to us and to pay us, right? That's not at all. We're trying to figure out, is there an opportunity for the entire ecosystem to work together in service of journalism and citizens? I don't know what the answer is exactly, but that's our hope.
So how does civil make money?
So I mentioned the example with the developers. So that's thing one. That's not going to be right away. We are having our, I'm just going to remind everybody again, civil token sale launch soon. This is a race for us. Okay, this is, candidly speaking, we're only going to have one opportunity to ever sell our token. We're not raising a bunch of money from different VCs. We have one funding partner, that's Consensus. We're not looking for anybody else. We're not trying to become we're not trying to exit and go public or something. This is the opportunity for us to do a lot of the things that we've spelled out. And by the way, we've made all of this public through our blog and everywhere else. The Civil Foundation, Civil Studios is going to be our for-profit entity, which invests in journalism-related projects. We have ideas around Civil Academy, Civil Labs. We want to think about different ways we can get into the community, but this all requires money. So this is partly where the Civil Token launch plays that role. Now, after that, that's where things like the developer opportunity kick in, hopefully. We also see a B2B or enterprise opportunity, and this is a lot of what I'm into these days, but I mentioned the licensing and syndication aspect. So if you think of a wire service, what would they benefit? How would they benefit from being able to better track their digital assets as they go throughout the internet, right? membership, curation. So we have a partnership with Mark Little, who's one of the co-founders at Storyful, and his team at Neva Labs is working on ethical curation. So how do you incentivize people to curate really great content, and content that actually might be personal to you, and be of the kind of quality that maybe you expect? And there are ways that cryptoeconomics can help to play into that, and how can that maybe benefit a news organization? We're not, I mean, I would say that we're not at the point where we're putting like price tags on all sorts of technology. What we really want to do right now is start to introduce this to the ecosystem, to newsrooms. Help them understand what on earth is this. And I don't even know that we have every answer on how we might work with some newsrooms. I think there are going to be ways that we're all going to discover together. But yeah, so there's, I mean, we are a for-profit company, and we're not shy about saying that. In order for all of this to work, we have to help ourselves too. And there are sort of near-term and then longer-term, targets with all of this. But yeah.
Are there equity shareholders at Civil?
So the only sort of way to think about when you think about what equity is, and so the Civil token is really what amounts to that, okay, as being like part of the cooperative platform. There are no shares, there's no, and by the way, I don't know if anybody who's been following this space heard the SEC say a couple of weeks ago that Ethereum is not a security. So for us, this was great news, and for everybody who's in this space, that's great news. You still have to demonstrate that your token has a utility purpose to it, okay? But is it also possible that it has value? Yes, I mean, we would be lying if we said otherwise. But the only way that the value ever goes up is if it's in service of all of this. There's no way that it has this crazy volatility like it does with something like Bitcoin.
I guess the reason I'm asking that
Yeah.
is I'm part of a crypto company too, and we're struggling with that, right? The struggle is legally you have to have equity shareholders to a company, right? And I'm trying to figure out how have you guys gotten away from that?
Well, we still have caps tables and people still have equity. I mean, employees have equity. But in terms of like shareholders,
Yeah.
right, there isn't like the broader public because we're not public.
So assume for a second you're on the platform and majority shareholders decide they don't like what the co-op is doing. They have the right to unilaterally say no, right? And change the whole platform.
So if the community, and by changing the platform, I assume, do you mean the Constitution? Because that's really
the Constitution.
the Constitution. So there are parameters built in. If a super majority of the community wants to change the Constitution, then they can propose an amendment to the Constitution, which will then be voted on. So there are pretty steep mountains to climb in order to get that number of people.
But it never goes back to equity shareholders for their input.
No, correct. I mean, this is where, I mean, we're not, as a civil media company, we will not have the majority of the tokens. We will not have, and this is all public and transparent, right? So there's no, it's not like, oh, we have this secret stash somewhere. This is all verifiable. And so after the civil token sale is completed, we will no longer be the majority holder. Yeah.
I just have one more question. You
Yeah.
mentioned earlier that it's $1,000. I think you said approximately.
Yep, roughly $1,000. Yep.
For a platform for somebody to be on the platform.
Yep,
right?
yep.
A publisher.
Yep.
Is $1,000 enough? And the reason I ask that is,
Mhm.
if I'm a Russian oligarch and I want to come create a platform and write whatever it is I want to write.
Mhm.
And I understand there's a constitution, you guys can kick me off, but in
Mhm.
the meantime, I can do some real damage, right?
In theory. I mean, yeah, sure. I
But
mean,
you're going to take all their dollars, you're going to take $1,000.
not to us. It gets held in escrow, right?
It's going to be
But
slashed.
it's
You're going
tokens.
to slash those tokens, right?
Sorry,
You're going to slash those tokens, you're going to take those tokens.
we don't take them back, right? Can we take them back, do you mean, or do we take them
Well,
back?
yeah,
I mean,
if you find somebody on the platform that is a bad actor, and the group, and the majority of the
I think that,
participants,
yes.
you take it, right? I imagine you take it.
Well, in the challenge scenario, if they were violating the Constitution left and right, I don't think it would take very long for them to be challenged and voted off the island, right? So, and those tokens would just get distributed back to the community.
Gotcha.
So, but just for 1 second, the $1,000 amount, like which is kind of like the ticket to entry, right? Okay. This is also something we've debated a lot, because what about in developing countries, maybe, where that feels a bit onerous? Is it high enough? Do we want journalists to feel like they really should figure this out? Like, this isn't some frivolous, jokey thing. Like, what if it, I'm just hypothetically now, but what if it costs $5,000? We'd get fewer newsrooms at the beginning, but they'd be maybe ones that are like, we're gonna figure this out. Now, if we lower it, let's just say it's $500 or $100, gosh, everybody wants to jump in there, but the quality maybe is kind of like a bit meh. So then does that all start to fall apart because people see that the quality is not great, they don't want to join. So what are the reasons that anybody would want to do this? And there's a lot of human psychology here too, I think.
Yeah. How is the platform governed from that perspective? So like if somebody wants to change what the entry fee is 2 years from now, can they propose that via the Constitution?
Yes, they can. That's a great question, and that's maybe my shortest answer, but yes, the community of civil token holders has that authority ultimately. So if they want to change that, they can. Yeah.
You said earlier, though, that I was intrigued with the sort of copyright issue question that you were talking about, saying that it can be delineated very in a very complex way. That to me seems like it would be one of the biggest values to freelance journalists.
Yes.
To get paid, to make sure they can get paid as their material, photojournalists or any kind of journalist, as their material is used over and over.
Absolutely, and there are conversations afoot, and something that I hope we can announce very, very soon around just that, and maybe a little less so about freelancers and more to your sort of point about licensing and following creative content. But freelancers is a whole area that we would love to figure out. We were talking to one newsroom recently that has a talent network, pretty robust talent network, and they were thinking, is there a way to kind of help to manage that more equitably, right? And so this is where I get people who come up to me and they say, well, what is blockchain? And I'll do a presentation afterwards. People are like, I still don't understand blockchain. And I said, well, at some point it's going to be a bit like asking what is the internet, because I couldn't, as somebody who's worked in the internet space as a tech reporter for a long time, if you asked me to explain the internet, at some point after the cables are into the ocean, it starts to fall apart for me. I'm just saying, okay? So there are aspects of this that I would just not worry about, and I'm not trying to dissuade you from looking into it. Look into it all you want. But don't go crazy with it. There's an element of decentralization to this, and there's an element of the kind of transparency and trustless transactions and all this stuff. It's all wrapped up in it. I think if you start to hang on to what does it enable, right? What did the internet enable that we didn't have before? Why did people want to start having communities or being online or exchanging things? Most of us can remember back to what that was like, but it was all new and felt weird. And a URL, what is a URL, right? And now people are like, blockchain and decentralization, It's changing rapidly, right? So anyway, the point is that I think there are going to be a lot of ways we can think about this stuff. Yeah. No, not a tough question at the end here.
I'm fascinated by this idea, but I wonder if I say have a news platform, let's say it's called TrumpStooges.com, and I check the I agree box on your agreement. Does your platform have any libel responsibility, coverage, or anything else?
So, okay, so there are two answers to that question. One is that in a similar way, the community has the opportunity to hold TrumpStooges.com accountable. I will be candid with you that I've done actually a good amount of legwork trying to contact newsrooms that we might all struggle to say, okay, and try to reach them just in a spirit of hi, I'm Daniel, right? It's hard. There's not really an easy opening for these conversations, and some of them are just not interested, okay? So there's, but, and I've also taken a bit of an, I would encourage, I don't know if I would encourage people here, but I've been forcing myself to read and watch a lot of different stuff, okay? And I think we all tend to get into our little cozy areas of news and journalism, and it feels good, and it's like reinforcing all of our worldviews and so on, right? There's all this other stuff out there. And we all know about it, but I don't know how much of us actually spend time watching it or listening to it. I will tell you, anecdotally, there's a tiny bit of journalism happening in some of those places. It's not necessarily, or not even a tiny bit. Some of it's, I don't know. Does it violate the Constitution? I'm not the authority on this. But I will say that sometimes I listen to it, or I read it, or I watch it, and I'm like, would TrumpStooges.com live on civil? I don't know. We do all these thought experiments. What about Nazis? What about this, that, right? I mean, there are good...
Take a non-controversial amendment. What about the underlying question of libel? If you're a real investigative reporter, you're trying to be independent.
Yes.
That is the greatest stumbling block of all by a mile.
And we heard that from every journalist who came to our platform at the beginning. And I think that, and it was something that I wouldn't say that we were caught flat-footed, and this is, by the way, almost a year ago now, but just in like the early discussions we were having. I have a whole story that I could tell you if we turned off the camera, but there's something that we can announce pretty soon that I just think is pretty neat that addresses that very thing. And I'll just say that no previously existing liability option would talk to us or would satisfy the journalists that we were talking to. So we had to get creative. And anyway, so we're going to be announcing some things soon. I just don't. I'm
So
sorry.
like a firm maybe?
So the answer is yes, that we know that that's a huge issue, and that I'm super impressed with the team and what they came up with, because it's not the sexiest thing that you want to work on. But I'm just going to say, if you had the opportunity to create an insurance company, would you do that? So this is the kind of stuff that we have to try to figure out, right? And yeah, so yeah.
Hi. So you mentioned kind of the example Wikipedia and the curation. So all of these are different websites. If I'm a community member, where do I go to figure out what's being published? Because even on these websites, you said that not everything may be pushed to the blockchain.
Yes, so all of these sites have sort of their own marketing strategy, right? So, and they're not also, I think they would also say that they're not trying to, Block Club Chicago is very focused on Chicago. So if you care about Chicago in any way, you lived there or you live there now, or you like it as a city, maybe that's for you, right? So that's their audience. And they're thinking about social media and sort of like all of the traditional ways, newsletters and events and Kickstarter. They had a huge Kickstarter campaign. Block Club Chicago had the largest journalism Kickstarter campaign in history. It was like $125,000 or $150,000 when they had to shut it down. So they're trying to find all sorts of ways to achieve sustainability and drive audience, and they have total autonomy on that. Now, and then, in terms of the discoverability of newsrooms, I mean, they come up in search, right? I mean, they're just published on AWS or like cloud content. They're no different than any other news site, really, that has to struggle and figure these things out. Maybe they have an advantage as this network effect starts to kick in and people are talking about civil or this newsroom or, whatever way that people come across new stuff, right? Which I think we all maybe just have a slightly different way of doing that. But they're all going to have to figure this stuff out. And this is why we're working with all these different entities, partners and associations and journalism schools and so on, to try to set up best practices and share what works and what doesn't. But yeah, they're gonna have all these challenges just like any other web property, right? There's no magic beans associated with all of this. But can what we're doing, and this is sort of what I was getting to about the monetization aspects, the trust, the what is civil, the community, cooperatively owned part of it, what is appealing to people, right? The fact that you can give directly to a newsroom. You know where your money's going. Some of these newsrooms are making it quite public where the money goes. It goes to fund this story for this much time. If you do this, this is what we'll publish, okay? So I don't know that when I subscribe to X news organization right now, my money goes to somewhere. I don't know where exactly. I hope it goes to the right place. I don't know. I don't really get an opportunity to even ask, right? Subscriptions are wonderful, but what am I getting out of it again exactly? Like the content, great, and then who's benefiting? Why are you laying journalists off if I'm subscribing to you? Who's not handling this properly, right? So
I think I'm wondering more about if I'm a token holder and
Mhm.
I want to challenge a piece of content or something like that. I mean, is there a platform that the token holders have access to?
So yes.
Okay.
So that's the token curator registry. So if I go to, so here are the newsrooms that we're talking about. We have another one up in the Hudson Valley, by the way, if anybody's from the Kingston area. They'll be publishing soon. And so if you, let's see, where's our registry? So this is where, we're gonna make all of this public, and you're gonna be able to see who's on the registry and where to challenge and who's in what state of being reviewed. This just isn't possible right now because the token's not out in the world. But once the token's been distributed to everybody who owns it, there will be a mechanism for them to go in and challenge, and it doesn't involve anything to do with blockchain or dApps or sort of like being in that space. It's all done through the web essentially. And that process is, we have to think of, making this very consumer friendly, right? We like to joke about trying to sell a civil token to our parents or something, but that really is the audience that we're trying to reach with this stuff. So we want to make it as easy as possible for them to be involved. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So.
Did you say that if you challenge and you lose your tokens?
If you challenge and you lose your tokens. And 50% of them will go to the winner, and the other 50% get distributed to everybody who participated in the vote to incentivize them to do this again, right? So, so I guess, is that another question? Or, yeah. Yeah.
Maybe this will be the last one.
Yeah, I was just curious, when is it appropriate for the vote to close?
For the vote to close, so if it's like there's a challenge and then when does the vote end? I can't remember where we settled on that. I think when newsrooms apply, it's something like 5 to 7 days. If nobody challenges them, then they sort of just like by default have access to the platform. Do you mean like if somebody challenges, then when does the vote sort of trigger after that?
You keep piling on, when does it?
Yeah, a lot of this is like, some of it's about the first person to challenge, some of it may be multiple people. There could be groups of people who want to challenge a newsroom because it's a significant stake and they just don't have enough tokens, so they want to, crowd fund a challenge or something, right? There are going to be a lot of different types of these things happening. But yeah, there will be a time box for all of these things. So yeah.
Is the idea that it's like an IPO? I don't totally understand. You're going to have 16 million of these coins, right? Mm-hmm. And you'll set the price, or how does that?
So the price will actually be determined by the number of bids that we receive, because when you go to buy a civil token, okay, and this will take place in about a month, okay? And we're trying to do everything we can to get the word out to people, right? Sometimes it's a little hard to be salesy in service of something that feels like a service.
Well, then I think you said it's a business.
It is a business,
Yeah.
but also
so there's an incentive to be salesy, right?
There is absolutely incentive, but I think just as somebody who was in journalism for so long, I'm not as comfortable being salesy. I'm comfortable talking about journalism, but if I have to talk about it from a sales perspective, I will. So you as a consumer can come to our site, and if you're only comfortable putting in $100, because that's all you feel like you can risk to buy civil tokens based on what you know, that's fine. You don't have to buy $1,000 worth or $10,000 worth or whatever. In fact, you could just buy $1 worth if you want.
So if you put in 100, if you say, okay, I want to buy $100 worth of civil tokens.
Yep.
But I don't know how many tokens that's going to be until
Sure.
the thing is done, right?
Yep. So what we would rather that people think about how much money they're comfortable purchasing civil tokens with, right? Not worrying about how many tokens they'll have, but how much money are you comfortable putting into this? Because we're not asking people to lose their life savings in this, right? So if you're only comfortable, if your risk tolerance based on what you know, because how do any of us make a decision on this stuff? But maybe you all now feel like, all right, I'd be willing to give $200 because you all seem like you're pretty good people. I guess this stuff works. I don't know, right? It's a leap of faith. So if people, let's just say people put in $100, and at the end of the Civil token sale, and by the way, their Civil token launch, the sort of history here, okay, because we're obviously not the first entity to sell tokens, is that they often sell out pretty fast. This isn't something that takes forever. They set up a 2-week time period, and sometimes they sell out within, like a couple days or something, because people just really want it. But what we're going to do is we'll set up this token sale, and it'll be possible to go on for a certain amount of time. And what we've set is, internally, we've set a cap of the money that we want to raise, because what we don't want is for we don't want this to be just. We don't want it to grow too fast, too far too fast, right? So we have to think of what is the right amount of money for us to raise, because what happens when we take all these bids, okay? So we take all of the bids, all the money that people were comfortable contributing to Civil tokens. We convert that to ETH or Ethereum, okay? Because this is now being converted into a form of cryptocurrency, because we need to redistribute back to people Civil tokens. And we're building on Ethereum. So there's a relationship between how many Civil tokens will be, or the value of the Civil token, because we'll have 16 million, right? About 16 million that we're selling, and 16 million that we're trying to allocate to strategic purchasers, essentially, okay? So there's a formula here between the amount of cash, fiat, that we collect, the number of tokens that we're selling, the conversion rate to Ethereum, because Ethereum changes all the time, and then that gets translated back into Civil tokens. So if you put in $100 and the Civil token ends up being worth $1, then you end up with 100 Civil tokens. Okay, so that whole distribution process has to happen after the token sale, token launch finishes. And this is where, we're asking a good bit of people here, because you need to have a wallet. I don't know how many people have either a hardware wallet or a MetaMask or some place to store tokens. This isn't putting them in your account, right? I mean, there's some work that has to be done for this to be possible. So we're trying to educate people about what all that means. And then we'll end up with the price. So it's, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not. But
I guess I was trying to figure out if that's a big way that Civil is funded. That's a big way you guys.
Oh,
pay your
absolutely.
costs, is like
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
this
Well, that's the point that I was making earlier. This is our this is our raise, right? But we only have a finite number of tokens. We're not going to sell tokens again and again and again.
Okay.
This isn't like a round of fundraising A, B, C, D, right? This is it. So if we can't get enough people to really, be bought in literally to what we're doing, then we all just take our ball and go home at some point, I guess, right? I mean, we're not looking for other investors. We might, but not right now. I mean, we're trying to get away from having any amount of sort of ownership, right? We want this to be the community. So yeah, it's absolutely going to be a source of capital for us. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Great questions, thank you.